On February 20th, 1954, the most powerful man on Earth vanished. While the public was told President Dwight D. Eisenhower had been rushed to a local dentist for an emergency root canal, the truth, whispered in the corridors of high-level intelligence, suggests a much more chilling reality. He wasn't in a dentist's chair. He was standing on the tarmac of Edwards Air Force Base, staring into the eyes of a civilization that did not originate on this planet. This was the night the Greada Treaty was signed, a document that allegedly traded our biological sovereignty for the secrets of the stars. It was a deal struck in the dark, and we have been living in its long, cold shadow ever since. The narrative of human progress changed overnight in the mid-1950s, shifting from mechanical labor to an era of impossible computing. But this leap forward may not have been a triumph of human ingenuity alone. Some believe it was the payment for a devastating compromise. The agreement was supposedly simple. The visitors would provide the United States with advanced technology, fiber optics, integrated circuits, and stealth capabilities, in exchange for a terrifying permission. They wanted to study us. They wanted to harvest biological data from the citizenry, under the strict condition that those involved would never remember the encounter, and that the government would be provided with a full list of names. As the ink dried on those classified pages, the world transitioned into a new era of silence. The Eisenhower administration found itself caught in a high-stakes gamble, where they were no longer the house. The visitors, often described as tall, pale entities or shorter, gray observers, reportedly operated with a cold, mathematical logic that ignored human morality. The treaty was intended to be a partnership of equals, but it quickly became apparent that the visitors had no intention of following the rules. The lists of names were never fully provided, and the frequency of biological census events began to spiral out of control, leaving thousands of people with fractured memories and a lingering sense of dread they could never explain. Consider the weight of a secret so heavy it could collapse the very foundation of society. Eisenhower was a general, a man used to the harsh realities of war. Yet witnesses from the inner circle claimed he was visibly shaken in the months following the desert meeting. The dental emergency was the first of many masks worn by the federal government to hide a truth that was too volatile for the public to consume. If the world knew that its leaders had effectively leased out the population to an unknown force, the social contract would have disintegrated in an afternoon. Instead, a wall of silence was erected, one that still stands today, reinforced by decades of ridicule and calculated misinformation. The technological explosion that followed the 1954 meeting is perhaps the most visible evidence of this hidden pact. Before the mid-50s, our most advanced technology relied on vacuum tubes and massive, clunky machinery. Suddenly, the transistor appeared. Then came the microchip. Science historians often struggle to explain the sheer velocity of these breakthroughs, attributing them to a singular spark of genius. But in the classified world, these weren't simple inventions. They were translations. We were learning to speak the language of a hardware that wasn't ours to earn. The price of this shortcut was the silent permission granted in the California desert. Within the classified sectors of the government, a shadow group known as Majestic 12 was allegedly formed to manage the fallout of the agreement. They were the keepers of the treaty, the men who decided what the public was ready to hear, which was often nothing. They watched as the visitors began to build subterranean facilities deep beneath the mesas of the American Southwest. Places like Dulce, New Mexico, became synonymous in hushed circles with the breakdown of the 1954 agreement. It is whispered that these facilities were where the biological study moved from the shadows into a permanent reality, far away from the oversight of any elected official. The tension between the military-industrial complex and the extraterrestrial presence reportedly reached a breaking point by the late 1950s. Eisenhower, realizing he had perhaps invited a wolf into the fold, began to pull back. His famous farewell address, in which he warned against the unwarranted influence of the military-industrial complex, is often reinterpreted through this lens. He wasn't just talking about weapon manufacturers. He was talking about the deep state apparatus that had taken the alien technology and run with it, creating a breakaway civilization that no longer answered to the Oval Office. He knew the treaty had been a mistake, a desperate grab for power that had cost the nation its soul. The visitors were not interested in our politics or our ideologies. They were interested in our genetic sequence. Some researchers suggest that these beings were facing a biological dead end of their own, a sterile existence that required the fresh, vibrant DNA of a younger species to survive. The 1954 agreement wasn't a traditional diplomatic exchange. It was a species-level salvage operation. We were the raw materials. The advanced technology we received was merely the payment to the gatekeepers who allowed the harvest to continue without interference. It was a cold, transactional view of humanity that reduced us to a resource. As the decades passed, the evidence of this secret history continued to leak through the cracks of the official narrative. Pilots reported crafts that ignored the laws of inertia, hovering over nuclear silos with an effortless grace that mocked our most advanced jets. These weren't just sightings, they were reminders. The visitors were showing the guardians of the treaty that they were still here, and that the agreement was still in effect. Every time a high-ranking official hints at unidentified aerial phenomena, they are dancing around the edge of a fire that was lit in 1954. They are acknowledging a presence that we invited in, but can no longer ask to leave. The psychological impact on the few who knew the truth was devastating. Men like James Forrestal, the first Secretary of Defense, allegedly suffered mental collapses under the strain of what they had witnessed. The sheer scale of the deception required to keep the agreement secret necessitated a culture of paranoia and absolute control. It birthed the modern intelligence state, a vast machine designed not to protect the people from foreign enemies, but to protect the secret of the visitors from the people themselves. The 1954 meeting wasn't just the start of a presence, it was the birth of the deep state. But what happened to the technology? If we have had access to such power for 70 years, why are we still burning fossil fuels and riding on primitive rockets? The answer lies in the nature of the deal. The most transformative technologies, those involving zero-point energy and gravity manipulation, were reportedly kept in the hands of a private, corporate elite. They didn't want to save the world. They wanted to own the future. The agreement allowed for a secret technological hierarchy where the public world is kept in a state of artificial scarcity, while a private world thrives on the remnants of the extraterrestrial gift. The 1954 agreement also raises the question of modern abductions. For decades, thousands of individuals across the globe have reported being taken against their will, subjected to examinations that feel more like industrial processing than medical study. If the Greada Treaty exists, these aren't random acts of cosmic voyeurism. They are the continuation of a legal contract signed by our own government. The missing time experienced by victims is the result of the visitors utilizing their advanced understanding of the human mind to erase the tracks of their work, fulfilling their end of the treaty to keep the public unaware. Eisenhower's reported frustration near the end of his term suggests he tried to regain control of the situation. There are rumors of a threat he made to invade Area 51 with the First Army if the project managers didn't start sharing what they had learned from the visitors. But the threat was hollow. By then, the black projects were self-funding and self-governing. The President of the United States had been relegated to a need-to-know basis. And as far as the keepers of the secret were concerned, he didn't need to know anything. The power had shifted from the constitutional government to the technocratic shadow government. The legacy of the 1954 meeting is a world of mirrors. We see the lights in the sky and are told they are weather balloons or natural phenomena. We see the rapid evolution of our digital world and are told it is the natural progression of human logic. But the feeling that something is off persists. There is a collective intuition that we are being watched, that our progress is being managed, and that the price of our modern comforts is something we haven't yet been told. The Greada Treaty represents the moment we traded the mystery of the universe for the security of a cage. In the end, the alien agreement of 1954 remains one of history's most haunting what-ifs. If it happened, it means that our entire modern history is a scripted play, performed on a stage built with borrowed tools. It means that the others are not coming. They are already here, and they have the paperwork to prove they belong. As we move closer to what many call disclosure, the fear isn't just about what the visitors look like or where they come from. The true fear is discovering what our own leaders gave away on that cold February night in the desert, and whether we can ever buy back our freedom. The silence from the official channels is not a lack of evidence, but a mountain of it. Every redacted file, every intimidated witness, and every unidentified object captured on gun camera footage is a fragment of the truth that Eisenhower supposedly confronted. We are living in a managed reality, a carefully curated garden where the walls are made of secrets and the gardeners come from the stars. The Treaty of 1954 wasn't just a document. It was a pivot point for the human race, a moment when we stepped off the path of natural evolution and into a structured, monitored existence. This is a story of a handshake that redefined the species. In the early hours of the morning, far from the prying eyes of the press, the leader of the free world signed away the one thing we always assumed was our birthright, our independence. We look at the 1950s as a time of innocence, of white picket fences, and the dawn of the nuclear age. But beneath that veneer of simplicity, a dark architecture was being built. The foundation was laid in the sand of Edwards Air Force Base, and every technological marvel we have developed since is merely a brick in that hidden wall. If this treaty is active, it explains the selective silence of our governments regarding the presence of non-human intelligence. It explains why the most advanced aircraft in our arsenal are kept hidden in the Nevada desert, and why the search for clean energy is constantly stifled. To release the technology would be to admit where it came from. To admit where it came from would be to admit the price that was paid. And the price, according to the survivors of these encounters, is us. We are the currency of the Greada Treaty. The psychological toll on the collective human consciousness is perhaps the most subtle part of the deal. We live with a sense of pre-trauma, an unspoken awareness that we are not the masters of our own destiny. This manifests in our media, our films, and our recurring nightmares of being watched from the shadows. We are a civilization living in a house with a locked basement, and the 1954 agreement is the key that was thrown away. We are told to focus on the ceiling, on the stars, and on the next digital gadget, while the truth remains buried in the deep earth. As we look to the stars today, we should ask ourselves if we are looking for friends, or if we are looking for the landlords. The advanced tech in your pocket, the stealth planes in the sky, and the strange gaps in our historical records all point back to a single, clandestine meeting. The world changed in 1954, not because of a new law or a new war, but because of a handshake between a general and a ghost. The deal was struck, the technology was delivered, and the census continues. We are still waiting to see the full list of names, and we are still waiting to see if we were ever truly meant to be part of the bargain. The dark thriller of our existence isn't that we are alone in the universe. It's that we are not alone, and that we have already been sold. The shadows in the desert at Edwards Air Force Base haven't vanished. They've simply moved into the boardrooms and the bunkers. The 1954 agreement is the original sin of the modern age, a secret that can never be fully told because the truth would demand a reckoning that no government could survive. Until then, we watch the skies, we use the tech, and we try to remember what we forgot during those missing hours in the night. The question remains, was Eisenhower a hero trying to save humanity from a greater threat? Or was he a man out of his depth, making a deal with a force he couldn't comprehend? History records him as the architect of the interstate highway system and the president who ended the Korean War. But in the shadows of the Greada Treaty, he is something else entirely. He is the man who opened the door and realized too late that it could never be closed. The root canal of 1954 was the greatest lie of the 20th century, covering up the moment we became a protected yet harvested species. If the lists of names were never fully provided, as the rumors suggest, then the visitors have been operating outside the bounds of even the secret law. This would mean that the agreement has failed, yet the technology remains in the hands of the elite. We are living in the wreckage of a broken contract, a civilization built on borrowed time and stolen light. The truth of February 20th, 1954 is not just a footnote in history. It is the central theme of our modern reality. We are the products of a deal we never signed, waiting for a disclosure that may never come, because the people in power are too afraid to tell us who really owns the stars.